Welcome everybody to the Bangers and Classics podcast with me, James Rupper, who gives you no useful information whatsoever, and him, David Malloy, who's a fund of all knowledge, even a font of all knowledge. Have you got any exciting news for us, David? I just wondered.
Uh, well, a couple of bits and pieces. Bangers and Classics Quest that we've been talking about the last couple of weeks without telling too much. Taking a big step forward this week as the Bangers and Classics will soon be afloat. But it's not afloat. We're not afloat yet. So we will have to wait until certain things are done before we're floating. I mean, it could happen overnight. We could get torrential rain here, and
Yeah.
then that's fine. Yeah, we're sorted for that. But in that sense, I'd like to sort of thank somebody. It's a chap called Carol Dimment from Yeovil, thoroughly nice bloke who's been extremely helpful in the search for a boat. Carol's been brilliant. He's a car fan as well, I have to say. So, Carol, thank you very much. It's very much appreciated, mate.
Yeah, thanks very much, Carl, because now David can stop talking to me about boats, really.
Not really, no. This is just the beginning, my boy.
There's more boat chat coming.
Yeah, if you don't behave, you'll get keel hauled, old boy, you know.
All right.
Press ganged, there's all sorts of things.
Yeah.
You do know that I was once in the Naval Reserve, don't you?
I had no idea.
Before I was thrown out. It wasn't my fault. I mean, anyone could just sort of reverse an aircraft carrier into an island. It's not.
That's right. Easily done.
Very easily done, yeah. So, James, anyway, moving on from boats to cars. You see any cars this week? Anything of interest?
Well, I always see things of interest, which is good. But I've seen some very ordinary things, which I think are interesting. And there seems to be where I live an outbreak of Ford Escort vans. I don't know the last time you saw a Ford Escort van. But there are still ones earning a living up here. They're either red or white. There's no in between. There's no sign writing on them, but there's sort of ladders involved. You can see there's stuff in the back, and there's people using these vans, which are a good 25 years old,
Right.
if not more. So hats off to them for doing it.
Yeah, just a quick question though.
Yeah.
When you were spotting these vans, did you spot if there were any boiler suits and or flat caps involved?
I didn't actually. No, used to have a member of the family who had one, and basically, yeah, that was his uniform, his red Escort van, and he had a succession of red Escort vans, and we're never quite sure what he actually did with his red Escort vans, but yeah, he did. He did do it, and no, they are. But they are, sort of hardworking, easy to look after, will rust, sort of vehicles. Apart from that, it's just the glam stuff. There seems to be an awful lot of people coming up here to drive Morgans. I've seen a colossal amount of Morgans, and it wasn't like there was a Morgan meeting or anything, but just seen an awful lot of people out and about in their sort of faux 1930s throwback vehicles. When they've got V8 engines, they do sound very nice, I must say.
Well, you live in the posh part of the world, James.
That's very nice.
You get all of these things. Those of us in Spam Valley, we might get a Ford Escort van with two wheels missing or something like that. But yeah, no, I haven't seen anything. Not a thing. I've been too busy with other stuff.
Well, boats, obviously, yeah.
Well, not just boats. I mean, not just boats. Just lots of other things to do. And I haven't seen anything at all interesting. I have been looking out, just not a thing. But not to worry. I'm sure that'll change in time for next week. So anyway, shall we kick on with this week's banger or classic? And I think that's quite an interesting car this week. One that's in some ways is forgotten about to a certain degree, even though it was hugely successful. And that's the Peugeot 405. What are your thoughts on that, James?
It was a rep special, wasn't it? It was one of those cars that was either a saloon or it was an estate. Most of them seemed to be saloons when saloons were still quite fashionable, and they were, very very affordable. They became used cars a few years after they were knocked off their fleets, and they entered the realm of the used car quite quickly. And you could pick them up for the family. There were a lot of really basic spec ones around, I remember at the time, but it was a good car to drive, and I think that's what sort of set it apart from many other vehicles. I don't know if you ever had a go in one, David.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, James. They're very good to drive. I mean, you're right as well. They were designed for the fleet market. They share the same floor pan as the Citroen BX, which of
Mm,
course really wasn't intended for the fleet market. 405 just kept it simple. Very simple Pininfarina lines, conservative lines. Well, they weren't groundbreaking. Stood the test of time fairly well. Look
mm.
at the running gear. There's nothing extraordinary about that. For the most part, I'll come back to that in a minute, but it was generally tried and tested stuff. But what they did was they took a fairly conventional, fairly normal recipe, and they did it very well. They built it pretty well. They made it comfortable, and it drove so well. And won the European Car of the Year contest and amassed, I believe, the highest ever score in the contest history. So that's not bad.
Goodness me, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I had to write an article about one once.
All right.
So I'm looking through my notes for that. I am cheating here, as you'd expect from me, of course, being
Mm,
a thoroughgoing rotter. But yeah, I mean the other thing about the 405 was it gave rise to the MI16 model,
yeah.
which is the 1.9 litre 16 valve engine. And back in the day, there was a bit of competition between MI16 and the Renault
Mm.
21 Turbo. The Peugeot probably handled slightly better. The Renault had the power. It's an interesting matchup. And, think about it, James. What would you rather drive? What would you rather have had back in the day?
Yeah, I would have gone for the Peugeot because I always just thought Renault's, would explode really, and
Hmm.
especially with the turbo. So
Wrong.
it would, well, of course I'm wrong, but yeah, it would either rust or do whatever. But yeah, I quite like Pugs myself.
Yeah, I like both actually, but I have to
Mm,
say that turbo Renaults I had were pretty good. The MI16 wasn't the top model because they brought along the T16, only available in left-hand drive, and I think they made 1,046 of them. T16 was turbocharged, had four-wheel drive, and thanks to a limited time overboost facility, pumped out up to 217 horsepower. So it it wasn't slow. Let's put it that way. It shows how versatile the design was. It could go from a very cooking family car, fleet car, to something a little bit more fire breathing in the T16, and it achieved all of those things with ease. And even was sold in Iran for many years after Peugeot stopped selling it in Europe. So it's had a very interesting and very long career. And for that reason, James, I have to say I think it's a banger. No, 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 no. Sorry. I mean classic. Yeah. Someone held up the wrong cue card. I think it's one of Joe
uh,
Biden's.
is it? Yeah, it's very hard. I mean, again, it's another one of those cars that we discuss, and you do not see anymore. I cannot remember the last time that I
Hmm.
saw them, and yet they used to be absolutely everywhere. And on that basis alone, it's something of a classic. But as you pointed out, it was quite an exceptional, ordinary car, really.
Hmm. Right, so we'll just take a quick break there. You're listening to Bangers and Classics, the podcast that goes where no other podcast goes. Well, that's because they're too smart to go there, but nonetheless, the point remains. So, welcome back after that short break. We're going to try something new here because we always try things new on Bangers and Classics, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. And when they don't work, it's always my fault. So, I just want to sort of exculpate James if this doesn't work. Um, the idea is that we take a car, a time, a road, and a song, combine them all together, and we say why that particular car, that particular road, that particular song, and that particular time meant something to us. And that's an idea you might want to think about yourselves. Anyway, Mr. Ruppert, do you want to kick off with this one?
Well, you can do. I mean, it's an idea that you may well have copied from the German car industry, My Part in Its Victory, where actually I started each chapter with a musical reference because at the time when I was flogging BMWs for a living, that was quite an important part of it. Is you would buy a cassette. From Our Price Records or Virgin Megastore on a Monday, and you play it to death by the weekend on your cassette player, on your Alpine deck or whatever deck it would be. Sometimes it was a Radiomobile, sometimes it was Alpine.
I think Del Boy
Um,
sold me mine.
that was it.
Yeah.
Or the whole range of Blaupunks that you have. You could have a Blaupunk for various cities. If you had a Blaupunkt New York, you were doing extremely well. I don't know whether that's the case anymore. But yeah, so I am very much on board with yes, a track and a car can certainly act as a time machine and take you back to that particular era or place.
Hmm.
And I've gone on for ages without telling you what it would be, but actually it would be your fellow countrymen, Simple Minds.
Oh,
Up on the catwalk. I can remember that blaring out very noisily, thumping even in the vehicle. Um, and yeah, it was. I mean, it was. I mean, I liked all the albums from that sort of early to mid 80s era before they sort of went a bit too poppy and too stadiumy, really. But yeah, I mean, yeah, stuff like Up on the Catwalk from New Gold Dream was a very good
brilliant song,
record.
brilliant track.
Yeah. But yeah, it would have been that for me. That takes me straight back there to a very important and fun time of my life when
Hmm.
in the passenger seat was a girl who looked like she was in Bananarama probably, and and we were off to go and do something. And yeah, it was great. It was a wonderful time to be alive. I was a very lucky person. But they were the soundtrack to my life at the time. So
Right.
thank you
What
very
time?
much.
What year would that have been, James?
83, 84,
Yeah,
really. And the other people actually, I quite like Scritti Politti, which I don't think anybody's ever heard of.
I have.
But
Yeah,
they were fantastic. I used to like their stuff.
yeah. I never got used to the guy's voice. Was
Mm.
it Woodbees? Wasn't it? Remember?
Yeah, that's right.
Aretha.
Woodbees, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I remember
Kramer,
that.
Aretha Franklin, yeah.
Yep,
That was
that's
all
it.
good stuff.
I always confused them in Prefab Sprout for some reason. Don't ask me why, but I did.
Yeah.
What road would you have been driving, do you think, in that car when you were playing that song?
Well,
I think.
I could, yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, I would have been in the centre of London, really, sort of Park
Hmm.
Lane, all the places you actually now can't drive, or you're stuck in, a massive traffic jam the whole time. So, I'd been driving along Regent Street. I'd be driving along Piccadilly, Haymarket, Park Lane, the Embankment, all the iconic routes of London, which have
Hmm.
now been spoilt beyond all recognition and are utterly undrivable.
Yeah. What car would you have had then? Golf?
No, that's for me. It was 5 Series. I just had a whole string of 5 Series E28 company cars, so I just had one after the other. I did start with the 3 Series, but after that, it was because they found the 5 Series was more challenging to sell. So there were a lot more of those about. So most of us salesmen had E28s. So that's what I would have had, and
Hmm.
and the best one I had a 525i automatic, which was fantastic in
Hmm.
silver, electric
Yeah.
roof, and all that stuff.
I can't imagine the later 5 Series would have been hard to sell. The one that came along at the end
No,
of the 80s, that was a gorgeous looking car.
it was, yeah. The thing was they didn't change from when it was the E12 and then it became the E28. There wasn't much of a change. It was more of an evolution, and I
Yeah.
think that's why people just didn't adopt it so quickly, and that's why. The next model on from that, which was the E34, they really raised the game on that and made it, a very different, very good car. But certainly, the E28 was fantastic, and if you sold one, it would never come back to you. And there were some fantastic ones like the Etta, which was a car built for these times. In that it was meant to be
I
economical, and
remember that, yeah.
yeah, and you could get over 30 miles to the gallon out of that quite easily. It was very easy to drive, and it was very, very quick. Actually, it was faster accelerating away from the lights compared to something like a 635. It had very low down torque. It was a very good car.
Hmm. Yeah, you're saying about Simple Minds.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say probably Simple Minds really started to deteriorate when the bass player left, Derek Forbes. Or he
Mm.
didn't leave, he was, I think he was shown the door, I think it's probably
Was he?
fair to say. Yeah, well, he says he was anyway.
Mm.
It's all ancient history now, of course. But it turns out when I was a student, my folks were living in England, to come back up to Glasgow to go to university. And couldn't find anyone. They wouldn't accommodate me in the halls because I was too old or whatever. I
Oh.
was probably more. I was over 18, so that was it. I was probably about 20, 21, and to find somewhere to live. So it was a basement sort of bedroom in the quite a posh part of Glasgow. And it turns out that about 50 yards away, just diagonally across the street, that's where Derek Forbes, the bass player of Simple Minds, lived. I never saw him, never knew at the time he lived there. But yeah, I did live quite close to him very, very briefly. The idea for doing this came to me a couple of nights ago. I was driving home and a nice evening, put the radio on, local radio station, were playing 80s music. I thought, all right, that's okay, so I listened to it. And it struck me, I thought, hang on a second, I've heard this song, I've been in this movie before. I'm driving home, 80s music on, I'm driving a turbocharged Renault. Okay, this was a turbo diesel, not the point, no. And it took me back to the late 80s when that's exactly what I'd have been doing. It was a nice evening as well. And it took me back to a particular evening in 1989. And the car I was driving was my first Renault 11 Turbo. It was a grey 11 Turbo. It was a wonderful car, really, really good as the first car because we're young and you're stupid, as I was, and maybe still be stupid. I'm not so young anymore, unfortunately, but it looked after me. It really looked after me very well indeed. So I was driving home. I'd been down, I think, probably playing golf, and well, my mate was playing golf. I was whacking a ball with a bat basically around the place. It was pretty bad, and I was driving home the old A77, no longer. Well, it still exists in part. And it's not a spectacular road, not even a very special road, but it was a nice evening, nice music on in the car. And the song I was playing that I can remember playing, was Duran Duran's The Chauffeur. Don't ask me why I was playing it, but it was just on tape I had, and I put it on. And I got a feeling, and I've never really quite shaken it to this day, I still remember it. There was almost a sort of magic in the air that evening, and I could almost touch it, but it was just kind of out of reach. It was just the moment of the car, the music, probably the age I was, everything coming together. And it just felt a really special moment. Even though it was unremarkable in every immeasurable way, for some reason I can't explain, it was special. Like everybody else back in the days, I used to play a lot of 80s music, because it was the 80s, of course, and that's what you'd play. You'd play things like Def Leppard and Duran Duran, Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, all sorts of stuff. And of course, mustn't forget ZZ Top, James, or ZZ Top, as you call them.
ZZ Top, very much
yeah.
so. Yeah.
It was a few years after they had their sort of breakthrough. But I remember, as I think I said last week, there was a time when you could walk around and every car with young guys in it, just about every car that would pass, it'd be blaring out "Sharp Dressed Man" or "Give Me All Your Lovin' or Legs." And yeah, it was great. It was a great time. Bit of a reminiscence there. But if there's a car, a road, a song, time in your life that meant something special to you, let us know and we'll be happy to air it on the podcast.
Yeah, we would like to hear your favourite Brotherhood of Man track when you were cruising along in your Talbot Samba, along the South End seafront or something. That'd be good.
Rennie and Minata, possibly.
Yeah,
could be them too. Or we could really just go for the jugular here. Joe Dolce's Musical Theatre. Shut up in your face. The song that kept Vienna off #1.
Yeah.
How on earth did that happen?
Yeah,
but it's a travesty.
But what you've done, David, is you've mentioned it, and now I won't be able to forget that for the rest of today. Now, will I? So,
oh well, I think I should feel bad about that.
You? Yeah,
no, I don't. Oh, that's all good. That's good. That's made my day now. I've given somebody else a earworm. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sure you'll get your own back, James. You always do.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, that's it. Well, it's as my as there's a saying up here that say that's only loaned to you. What that means is basically I'm going to get my own back on you. So you can be ahead at one point in time, think you're doing well.
Yeah.
Get one over somebody else, and the chances are karma will strike, and you'll be in the receiving end next time. Moving swiftly on from that, American station wagons.
Yeah.
Remember the classic station wagons they used to have, James?
I do, and I mean the thing is, we do tell people to go and buy books, and I've got probably the largest personal private collection of American car books.
I was wondering where that was going,
and absolutely, and but I can highly recommend if you've got a birthday coming up and your auntie has said, "Oh, can I buy you a book for your birthday?" You need Cars of the Sensational 70s. It's part of a series. There's 50s cars, 60 cars, 70 cars, 80s cars. But Cars of the Sensational 70s is fantastic. It's a massive book, and they put the subtitle is "A Decade of Changing Tastes and New Directions," whatever that means. But basically, what you've got is 400 pages of colour pictures of cars and brochure pictures. So that's all I needed to do. I just thought, well, I'll just throw that open because all the vehicles from that era are just magnificent. Obviously, it's all faux wood V8 engines and absolutely massive, amount of space.
Mm.
And also, I mean, I think people should realise is that it wasn't, these weren't just. I know they were massive, but they also had lots of seats in them. You could get them with optional seating. I think up to 9 people in these station wagons, as they say. So if you had a very large Mormon family, I think you could get everybody on board one.
Now, is that 9 British-sized people, or European-sized people, or 9 American-sized people?
Well, I presume they're 9 American-sized people. But
Blimey.
I mean, something like, I mean, there you go. Look, I'm in 1970 because this book is in chronological order, and I'm looking at a Pontiac Executive Safari, and it came in 6 and 9 passenger versions. Amazing, and the faux wood trim and roof rack was $84, and there you go. And it's got like 6 headlamps at the front. It's just an amazing car. So yeah, I just go through this. I mean, things got a bit more depressing by the time we got to the 70s, and by the end, what am I looking at here? An Oldsmobile Custom Cruiser station wagon. Again, you've still got some faux wood going on. But at least you've still got a V8, but it's not as exciting looking. It's a bit too right angle and squared. But yeah, you are right. These are magnificent vehicles, which before we had sort of family vans, which again was something which was very much invented in America. You had characterful estates, which were absolutely huge. They're the wrong size for over here, but over there they were absolutely perfect. And,
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you got any experience of them, David?
Only seeing them in movies, etc. I mean, what I would say as well, they're gas guzzlers. They're
Yeah.
not particularly stylish cars. They don't handle very well. But you think of the American dream, James. You've got the nice house in the suburbs. You've got a lake behind it. You've got the fragrance of pine in the air. You've got long summers, mild winters, and you've got your station wagon with wood paneling parked out of the door. That's it. And you've got children singing, riding around on bikes, etc. That's the American dream. Thanks to movies, station wagons were part of that. That formed part of the quintessential American dream. I mean, you think about it. You watch a film from, say, even the 80s. You would probably have a station wagon in it, and one of the prominent characters, or someone linked to a prominent character, would happen. It could be the mother of the teenage protagonist, or the eccentric uncle, or it could be the family heading off to the weekend cabin. There were all sorts of tropes in those movies, and the station wagon played a big part in it.
That's right. And all, I mean, also, I could be married to Catherine Ross, couldn't I, as well?
Oh, yeah, no. Are we thinking of the Stepford Wives here, are we?
Was she in Stepford Wives? She might have been.
I think she might have been, yeah.
Yeah, I know they remade it a few years ago. It's a bit rubbish, but
it wasn't. No, it wasn't good. Yeah, but then you had at the end of the 70s into the 80s, you had something I think it was quite a remarkable car. I like it. It was the AMC Eagle came in, and think about this, folks. It looked like a station wagon, but it had higher ground clearance. It had a switchable 4-wheel drive system, so it could be 2-wheel drive, a 4-wheel drive. I don't think it had a V8 engine. I think it was a V6 was the biggest you got. There was wood trim, wood door trim, wood grain, shall we say, in some models. And it was a crossover really before there was a crossover. So a really, really clever car indeed. And they sold reasonably well, but AMC was obviously the smallest of the big American manufacturers. They never quite had the funds to do things the way they wanted to. Which is a
was
pity.
actually, as I thumbed through my cars of the sensational 70s, there was an AMC Matador station wagon, no less, which was basically very related to the Pacer, wasn't it? And actually, I would say is more furiously ugly than the Pacer. An AMC Matador, really.
Yeah, but they also made the Gremlin as well. Don't forget.
They did, yeah.
Yeah, those were a couple of the flops.
Yeah,
but they did do. But at least they were brave enough to do different things, James.
Well, that's right.
And that's the thing. But going back to the station wagons, I mean, are they as good as the image that was portrayed? I don't think they were. But you know what? I think they've still got something. I like them. I really do like them.
Yeah, I do. And I've just noticed that AMC even offered a combination of Levi's trim, so you could basically sit on a pair of jeans. How nice is that?
Well, it's going back to the old Volkswagen Beetle jeans, isn't it, with the denim
Yeah,
seats?
there you go.
Yeah, so everything comes round. I mean, everything's interlinked. There's no originality, James. Everything's interlinked in some way.
It
But
is,
yeah,
isn't it?
But these cars, yeah, the station wagons, yeah, I like them, and you do too.
I do.
So I think we'll take a break on that note, shall we? This is Bangers and Classics, the podcast that's so far off grid that there, well, isn't actually a grid. So, James, we are now back after another break, and we were going to talk about cars that were sold in this country but were available elsewhere under different names. And I'm going to give you one to kick you off. It's the Lancia Scorpion, which we've talked about before in the podcast, which was the American name for the Monte Carlo, and it wasn't just the name that changed, they changed quite a few things, not least of which was the engine. The Scorpion was saddled with an 81 horsepower engine, whereas the Monte Carlo had 120 horsepower. They added weight to the Scorpion, changed the front end styling, and gave it some really ugly bumpers, and consequently it didn't sell, which is a pity. But yeah, so the Monte Carlo, if you want to buy in America, it was a Scorpion, and it was a Scorpion that had no sting in the tail.
I see what you did there, David.
Yeah, badum-tish.
Yeah.
I probably nicked that from the book I wrote or something. I don't know what I'm like.
Yeah.
Recycle stuff. It's got to be recycled. That's
you've got to, absolutely.
See, we're good for the environment in this podcast.
Yeah.
So you want to hit me? You want to hit the listeners with one, James?
Yeah, I've only got two really. But you see, look, I can go back to cars of the sensational 70s, a decade of changing tastes in new directions. And under the Mercury banner, they sold the Ford Capri. So you could actually get a Mercury Capri, which was quite interesting. It didn't sell terribly well there, and it was actually quite expensive because the Capri 2, they say, when it was $4,117, which was regarded as quite a lot of money. You could probably buy a Cadillac for that, I think. So that was quite interesting. But it was an interesting variant because they had the double headlamps, didn't they, on them, as opposed to the single ones that we had over here. And you could also get them in sort of JPS colours as well. You could get black gold colour schemes on them as well.
Yeah, I saw one at Bo'ness at the Hill Climb a few years ago, and got a photograph. I took a photograph of it somewhere. Mercury Capri. It was an unusual car to see. You certainly don't see many of those about. If you don't see many 405s about, these things are obviously even thinner on the ground. Yeah.
No, that's right. So that I always found quite interesting. And the other thing, and it's strange that we should have already mentioned it. Well, you've mentioned it on the podcast. Is obviously the Hillman Hunter stroke Minx stroke Arrow series, which was found in Iran in rather large numbers as the Pecan. I don't know how you pronounce it.
Pecan, yeah. I think Pecan.
And that was always found quite fascinating. My dad had one of those. It was probably one of the most horrible cars ever.
Oh, Pecan.
Well, it probably was. I think it was probably quite a good basic car, but I don't know if you've ever been inside an Arrow series that
I do.
wasn't a Humber. But I mean, I've never felt plastic. Plastic fumes from everything there. It was just the seats were so plastic. Just everything about it was just synthetic, and it was quite grim. So it was really plastic and rust, which made that car up. But my dad only had it for a few years, and after about 2 or 3 years, it was just rusty as anything. It was terrible, really awful cars. But it probably in the slightly more benign climate of the Middle East, I think he did a bit better.
Yeah, my uncle had several Hunters. I remember having a Hunter GLS with the Hall Bay tuned engine.
Yeah,
and it went pretty well, as I recall. I really was only in single figures back then. But memories of it are good ones. It
was a car that actually won the London to Sydney rally in I think it's 1969.
It was 70, was it not?
Was it? I don't know.
It was around about. It was Andrew. I know. It was Andrew Cowan.
It was, wasn't it? Yes.
Who later became the boss of Mitsubishi Rally Art in Europe. Sadly passed away 2 years ago. Because I actually met him at the opening of the new Jim Clark Museum at Duns. And took a photograph of him. He was very gracious to let me take his photo for a magazine I was writing for.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, he wasn't well then, and sadly he passed away. But I mean, he had a good innings. He was over 80, and he certainly achieved a fair amount in his life.
Oh yeah.
And not least that rally win, but it was far from the only rally he won. He seems to have specialised and done very well in longer distance rallies and real
Yeah.
endurance stuff. Yeah, you were talking about Chrysler. Obviously, just a very simple example of cars with different names. Over here, the car was a Chrysler Alpine. In France, it was a Simca 1307, 1308.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you had, again, sticking with the same people, you had the Hillman Avenger, which became the Chrysler Avenger, which became the Talbot Avenger. But in America, it was the Plymouth Cricket.
Yeah.
And it didn't sell very well over there, unfortunately. And you had the MR2 over here. And in Toyota, in France, it's called the Toyota MR. Because if you say MR2 in French, it sounds like a swear word.
Yeah.
So they couldn't do that. And, the other example, a couple of other examples, obviously, you had various Opels change their name over here. You had the Ascona was the Cavalier and the Cadet was the Chevette. And, in the Matra Rancho, our old friend in Italy, was just called the Matra Ranch.
Oh.
Yeah, the dropped the O. I have no idea why that was. Maybe it fell off because of corrosion.
Yeah, good enough.
Shocking. And of course, then you had the MX-5, which various territories was called the Eunice or the Miata, or it says here, and I don't know who put this here, Rust Bucket. I'm sorry, I'm apologising yet again. It's just my traditional go at the MX-5. It's just purely in fun. Well, sort of. Anyway, yeah, but there's lots of other cars like that, and it can be quite fun to look them up, how cars' names and designations change from territory to territory. Moving on from cars that are called different things in different territories, I'm going to talk about a car that never actually came to the UK, even though it was a British Leyland product. And that car was a Leyland P76. Do you know much about them, James?
Not a huge amount. I do remember it very clearly at the time. It was a very big story because obviously Leyland were building a brand new car a long way away, and a lot of the speculation was, is it going to come here? As I remember, but I think all it is another demonstration of how inept British Leyland were at marketing and just thinking, or product planning, really, because they never did anything else with it. It was an Australia only car. Australia was a very tiny market then, and you sort of wonder what the point of it was if you weren't going to. I know bits of it ended up in the SD1 Rover, which we discussed last time, but it was a sort of just a big daft car, wasn't it? Designed to compete with those American cars. There was the Chrysler Valiant, wasn't there, and the Ford Fairlane, I think, or Falcon rather, which they had over there.
It was designed for the Australian market, and
it
was styled by Michelotti, and it was one of his off days, I think.
Yeah,
because it looked. I mean, it didn't look like an Italian thoroughbred in working clothes. It looked more like a sort of supersized 1970s Datsun, in my opinion, anyway. Not a handsome car, but a decent specification. It was lighter than its similarly sized competitors in Australia, which was obviously important for fuel economy. And you could have two engines. You could have a straight six, which was 2.6 litres, and a 4.4 litre V8, which was derived from the 3.5 litre V8 that was overused in the UK. And I actually got off to a good start, James. The V8 version took Wheels, which is an Australian car magazine. It took their Car of the Year award. But in typical British Leyland style, guess what happened? In comes some strikes. I think it was mainly component suppliers, to be fair. Then it was poor build quality. And we know what happened. There were plans to bring it to the UK, and they never did. There's no point in bringing it here because we all know what happened in the late 73, 74 with the energy crisis.
Yeah.
So bringing a car of that size, a big hulking gas guzzler by British standards, though not by Australian, wasn't going to work. It was born out of time for that. Not his fault, but that's it. So it didn't really do anything. It was only produced for a short time. They made about 18,000, and they were going to do a station wagon version. Let's go back to station wagons. There was going to be a station wagon version of it. They made 3 of them, and I think one still survives. They also made what was effectively, if you imagine this, a British Leyland muscle car. But the hatchback was called the 4.7, the coupe version of the P76. They did build a few more of those. They built 56 of them, ended up crushing most of them, but there's about 10 of them left. Quite an interesting looking car. Certainly looks a lot better than the saloon P76. Check those out if you can. There's plenty of pictures up on the web. Every now and then one comes up for sale down under. But an interesting car, but I mean, destined to go nowhere. The entire production one, as I say, was 56 pre-production cars, of course, and BL, in their usual wisdom, decided to scrap most of them, and that was that. So, British Leyland's haplessness sadly wasn't confined to the Northern Hemisphere. They managed to do pretty much the same in the Southern Hemisphere. So, you know, I was nearly saying something political there. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to behave myself. But yeah, let's just say that British Leyland's roots go deep in one sense. Anyway, so I think that's all we've got time for this week. There's one more thing we're going to do today, but we're not doing it for today, as it were. I haven't told James about this yet. He's just about to find out. It'll only take 2 minutes. But in the meantime,
You say that, David. I mean, you said these podcasts would only take 2 minutes, and I'm talking to you for about 10 or 12 hours sometimes. Terrible.
I know. It's it. Well, it's just it's your silver tongued sophistication, James. It's irresistible. We have to keep you on air. We have to keep you online, as it were. Yeah,
Right.
that's it. To make up for my shortcomings. I mean, well, not that you could. I mean, nobody could. But you come closer than anybody else, of course. He says, spreading the butter thickly on the toast.
Yeah.
But on that note, thanks very much for listening. Hope to see you next week.
Yeah, thanks for turning up, and see you next time.
You're not riding off into the sunset in a 405, James, this week?
Not in a 405. I'm going with Catherine Ross to the local garage with my new Polish exhaust.